OWS fam, the nation, my dudes and dudettes. Hilow here, bringing you a special installment of the OWS Best Ball Plus Industry Experts Series. As you can see, we're going to be joined by OWS co-member Michael Johnson. You know him in them streets. But I say interesting in the intro because today we had DraftKings DFS player pricing released. So we're going to do like this kind of borderline meld show. We're going to look at DFS player pricing. We're going to see what we can glean from that information in a best ball setting. And we're going to give a little look forward to DFS. So with no further ado, let's bring him in. Mr. Mike Johnson, how are we doing today, dude?
Hey, thanks for having me on. Excited to be face-to-face digital
Yeah, right.
with you for the first time in a little bit. So I think it was right after the NFL draft was the last time we were
Yeah.
rocking together. So yeah, this is exciting. I've been hearing your voice on my drives for the last 3 months and then on our, business calls or whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's good to jam it out here.
So before we jump into the nitty gritty here, let's look at kind of what we got going on over at oneweekseason.com. If you're new, if you don't know what oneweekseason.com is, this is oneweekseason.com. If you're looking for the Best Ball Plus product up here in the top, click Best Ball Plus 2023. That'll bring you to this home screen. And as you can see over here on the side, we've got all kinds of things in addition to our primary offerings, which are 90, 30 to 60 minute one-on-one training sessions. Go here, get Best Ball Plus, and you can see now we've got a nice juicy discount in there, $149 for the remainder of the Best Ball season. So Mike, we had player pricing released. We had contests. We have a $100 Millie Maker. We have all this stuff that we've been asking for and looking forward to for so long. I want to look at some of the player pricing that came out, and because we made this idea up on the fly. We had to flex this episode. You were gracious enough to suggest coming on with me. And so we haven't hashed any of this out. So I want to get kind of your first reaction to this player pricing. And I'm going to bring it up here from DraftKings. Look at these top 12-ish players. Was there anything that jumped out to you from an initial player pricing when we've been so like knee deep in best ball for so long?
Yeah, I mean, I think Nick Chubb kind of stands out when you look at that list of guys, Chubb and Taylor, Derrick Henry. Those are guys who it's interesting kind of tying this into our best ball product because we talk about that weekly upside discussion so often in our different training sessions and whatnot, and this right here is kind of a snapshot of that. All the rest of the guys on this list are first round players. These guys kind of fitting in with them, Chubb being ahead of Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, who generally Chase goes second and Hill goes, within the first 5 or 6 picks, and Chubb is 1-2 turn or later. So, just it kind of encapsulates a lot of the ideas that we try to talk about. So I think it's kind of nice to see it on the screen there. It's interesting, some of the pricing things were, I sent you a couple, but there were some interesting things throughout the pricing. But yeah, I think these top end guys, it just goes to show that at that top end guys, the top 3 rounds, those guys are all like week to week or even over the course of a season, a lot can happen. So where their range of outcomes for those, premier players is kind of separate from everybody else. And it's true on a weekly basis too. So, we've talked about some things with like unique player combinations in the early rounds. This kind of shows why that's so valid as an approach in best ball.
Yeah, the first 2 names that you kind of mentioned there were the first 2 that jumped out to me as well. And The Nick Chubb was the big one. He's the 5th highest price on the initial release of week 1 pricing. And we kind of have both spoke to this idea that like single week range of outcomes means a whole heck of a lot to us in a best ball setting. And with there being such significant overlap in these single week ranges of outcomes of the players in the first 3 rounds, like you mentioned. Oh, dude, I'm like stumbling over my words today. Um, we're recording this late because again, we're flexing here. But yeah, with this significant overlay, some unique player combinations. And when we talk about like combinatorial ownership, I don't really necessarily subscribe to that in best ball because it is mathematically impossible. I will say improbable, but borderline impossible to have 2 rosters that are exactly the same in best ball, where it's 18 roster spots or 20 roster spots on DK or drafters or wherever you're getting your best ball action. But when we look at like where it matters in the first 3 rounds. It matters in the last 3 to 5 rounds. That's where it really, really matters. And the fact that like we have now this like beautiful visual of the overlapping of range of outcomes for a single week for some of these players, hoping that it starts to set in here. The second name that kind of jumped out to me was Derrick Henry. And Derrick Henry is being drafted now around 22, ADP 22, 23, where Nick Chubb kind of started. And now we've seen Nick Chubb jump a full round, but Derrick Henry, we know he has elite single week upside, and we kind of see it reflected in these initial player pricings. Whereas on best ball, he's still being drafted at that 2-3 turn. Anything else that kind of jumped out to you here?
Just from the top range?
Yeah.
Yeah. Not really. I mean, it's kind of the rest of it is more or less there's a couple adjustments, but at this
Yeah.
top range, it kind of lines up with ADP. And you kind of see that a lot throughout the pricing, but then there's some interesting spots. There's some interesting players that really stand out as far as being far higher priced for week 1 than where they're
Yeah.
being drafted or far lower. So I'm sure
Yeah, we'll
that's
get there for sure. Yeah. Yeah, we're gonna get there. That's what I want to do actually, I want to throw you a curveball. Again, we have not talked at all about this. So getting these initial reactions I think is valuable. So I kind of set it up this way a little bit on purpose and a little bit because I'm kind of curious to where your thoughts are. So I'm going to bring us over to quarterbacks. And I want to, everyone knows up here, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert. That's your like tier 1 and 2 quarterbacks. And obviously we don't have like Josh Allen on this slate for DFS, but he's in there as well. When we talk about, or I guess when we start getting down here in this middle range, so we'll leave the screen right there, Tua and beyond. Is there anything that jumps out to you from this range of quarterbacks player pricing that you think is interesting or applicable to best ball?
I mean, the guy that the last time we were together that I was, going off about Anthony Richardson, the rookie who had a pretty sweet highlight clip that'll jump his ADP like 8 spots today. But
Yeah.
he's a guy
Who
I've
caught
been,
that is who I'm interested in.
yeah. He's Richardson. He's a guy who he kind of got pumped up, earlier in the cycle, like right after the draft. A lot of people were talking on him, but like his ADP keeps falling. It seems like he's down in the hundreds again. But the thesis hasn't changed. I mean, he is, he has that high rushing floor, that athleticism, the big play, big ceiling type thing. So, just from a DFS standpoint, he's a guy that I'm going to play a lot early on just because I know eventually, I mean, everybody week 1 is priced low, but eventually Anthony Richardson's price, he is likely with his skill set to have a price, up near that top tier. So like to me, it's like when Jalen Hurts was a rookie and he first started getting starts, and he was kind of raw, or like a couple of years ago when Taysom Hill got a start. and he was like $5,000 on DraftKings. It's that type of situation to me where he's the one that stands out to me. I might be playing kind of into chalk there because I
Yeah.
don't think I'll be the only one. But like the thing with week one pricing that stands out to me is, like I said, it's usually very soft. So it's gonna be easy for people to fit in those top end guys that have the huge ceilings. So to me, you're gonna have to, like, if you pay down at quarterback, it's got to be someone who can kind of match them, but at a
Hmm.
lower price, not just like keep pace dollar for, or like on a points per dollar basis.
A follow-on question to that: if you had to set a price for quarterbacks, where the maximum, what is the maximum price that you would classify like a value at the quarterback position?
Um, I mean, it depends on the like right now, week one
Yeah,
is,
yeah, that's a very
but
open-ended question, but
I think right around six.
yeah, I would
Right
say the
around
same.
6. And the other name that stands out to me, is Deshaun Watson,
Hmm.
and particularly if Joe Burrow is able to come back from the calf strain and be, healthy for week 1. I could see that game, you know, generally, I could see that game kinda popping off if Cleveland's offense ends up, taking the step that, like, I think you and I are expecting it to, and
Yeah.
we know what Cincinnati's capable of. I could see that going gangbusters, and, him at 6,000 is pretty interesting.
Yeah, when I'm looking at these player pricings, like through the lens of still like thinking about how this relates to best ball, and tell me how you what you think about this kind of thought process. We both agree that value tight end range is somewhere in the 5,500 to 6K range. Speaking strictly to DFS, right?
Value quarterback,
Well, yeah, yeah. What I say?
tight end.
Oh my god, I don't know what I'm doing, dude. What is
Late.
happening?
We're good.
Yeah. How you quarterback? Well, look here. We have Kirk Cousins at 6.3 and Geno Smith at 6.1, right below some of these tier two, tier three quarterbacks in Tua and Trevor Lawrence. That's interesting to me from a best ball perspective because obviously those quarterbacks are being drafted. Currently, Geno QB 15 off the board. And where is Cousins? Cousins is QB 13. So outside the top 12 at the position, yet these are reflecting top 12 salary for quarterbacks in a DFS setting. What do you think about that? Is that anything meaningful behind that? Is that a function of just the algorithm being the algorithm, recency bias, all that stuff? What do you glean from that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it just goes to show that those guys, the reason they're priced where they are is because they're more consistent and have slightly higher ceilings than the guys below them. And the reason that they're below the people above them isn't because they don't necessarily have the same ceilings, but because they don't as consistently hit that ceiling.
Yeah.
That's kind of my takeaway. So and that's where in a lot of our training sessions, I know I've a couple times talked about some theories, and I know you have as well in yours, but like, there's different ways to approach that position, and players like that specifically, how to work them into your rosters and which rosters they work best on.
I love it, man. We're gonna do the same thing for running back now, and I think off first glance, obviously, it's like Bijan Robinson is the fourth highest priced running back as a rookie in his first NFL game. We're kind of seeing the same hype reflected in best ball, obviously with him the RB3 off the board. But when you look at this list here, and we start getting down to names like Joe Mixon, names like Alvin Kamara being priced as this above median kind of pricing. So 6.7, you think about you have 9 roster spots where we're allocated 5.5 per. Obviously, you're going to have some, from a DFS perspective, you're going to have some values that allow you to pay up, but typically you're only going to fit in 2 to 3 probably the average is about 3 of these 6.5-ish type players on a roster DFS wise in a given week. Yet we see Alvin Kamara, who's being drafted in the 9th round currently. We see Joe Mixon, who we know has been a value for a while. Anything gleaned same kind of idea discussion point as quarterback with these running backs here?
I think it just goes, it is like a shining example of kind of the biggest fallacy that you see drafters making in best ball, fantasy drafts, whatever it might be, is being overconfident in things that they know or that they assume will happen, or
Yeah.
expect to happen. So, like with Mixon and Kamara, the reason they're being drafted where they are, Kamara to a greater extent, but Mixon too at like in the late fourth to early fifth, is expected negative outcomes in their future.
Yeah.
And the train has kind of left the station a little prematurely on some of those things. Like we still don't know for sure what that's going to look like. But the pricing here, DraftKings, they don't want to price these guys down at like 5K because then if they're active, it like ruins the slate because they'll be like 60% owned. So
And that's
they have to realistically price them at what they're worth if they're fully active and get their normal workload and like our even 80% of their former selves. So when you think about it from that lens, like you almost have to have some exposure to guys like those when you're drafting a lot of best ball teams, and it's they're veterans. Rookies get all the pub for as high upside picks, but sometimes the gift horse is staring you right in the face.
Yeah, and that leads us directly into kind of this next discussion. You look at the backups in New Orleans, primarily Jamal Williams and Kendre Miller, and look at their pricing. Would you say that Jamal Williams is priced up at all, like for the chance that Alvin Kamara misses this game?
No, that's an interesting one. I think that Kamara or Williams is 5,100 there. I know Tennessee usually has a great run defense, but year to year you don't always know what you're going to get. I think Miller at 4,300 is extremely interesting. If Kamara were to miss and Miller, gets on the field in the next couple weeks, where he's not, being babied in that first week. But yeah, I don't think either of them is really priced to a spot where you would expect. If we knew Kamara was out, then they're probably like 6,000 and 4,800 instead of 51 and 43, even with some pricing.
And now relating that back to best ball, we have Jamal Williams, who's going at the beginning of the 11th round, or right in the middle of the 11th round, and Kendre Miller going even later than that. So building those, again, we kind of call it best case scenario player evaluations, or that's kind of how I've tried to relay this thought process. But the best case scenario for Jamal Williams is that Alvin Kamara misses some time. So if you think about it through that lens, if we knew right now if we knew right now sitting here in July that Alvin Kamara was going to miss week 1, Jamal Williams' price would be somewhere higher than it is now, but lower than Kamara is right there. So that is the contingency value of the best case scenario for a guy like Jamal Williams as compared to some of these other backups that don't carry as significant contingent upside that are going kind of in that same range. So one of those guys in best ball that I've started to get a lot more exposure to. How have you kind of handled that New Orleans backfield?
Yeah, they all kind of are values. It's one of those things where the uncertainty has left it where just people are afraid to pull the trigger on them, it seems. And I think that they all fit really well on different builds. Like Jamal Williams, he's a guy that I've been targeting a lot on teams where maybe I have like Josh Jacobs, Breece Hall, Javonte Williams, guys who early in the season might be eased in, or if Jacobs holds out for a couple weeks. So it kind of
Yeah.
fits the roster and helps keep them afloat. On the flip side, Kendre Miller's a guy who, because he hasn't been practicing and stuff, he is. But was he cleared now? He doesn't have the thing next to his name.
He's off of
Oh,
what was he on, the NFI or pub, or
okay,
I
yeah.
forget what list he was
So he
on, but he's
passed his
off. Yeah.
physical, yeah.
Yeah.
So he's a guy who I've been drafting a lot, especially on teams where maybe I did get 2 running backs in the first 3 or 4 rounds, and where he could be
You can
like
do that? I'm just kidding.
he can where he can come in late in the season as like a extra piece, but I don't really have to rely on him early. And then Kamara kind of the same way, just anticipating he could be late. Jamal Williams Drafters is the site that I kind of tout as I think there's a lot of value in playing there. They
Yeah.
have no playoffs there, so that's where a guy like Jamal Williams I think has even more value. Given the fact that all the points from all the weeks count the same. So if he gives you 2 20-point weeks and 2 15-point weeks during a 6 weeks Alvin Kamara suspension, that's pretty valuable.
Now we're going to bring this discussion full circle and talk about like portfolio management in a best ball situation. Jamal Williams ADP in regular best ball and underdog is currently 127 overall. His ADP in weekly winners, which is just completely you draft one contest and it is used in separate DFS contests throughout the year, is 128. So he's going below where he's going in normal best ball in a contest like weekly winners, where that discussion of contingent upside is much more important. And that kind of stuck out to me as something that was an inefficiency. And I've been targeting him heavily and upping my exposure to the player in the different format where he's more valuable. Have you dove into the weekly winner streets much?
Yeah, I mean, and weekly winners had tip of the cap to underdog for that format, because I think it's just like it's phenomenal format.
It's so great, dude.
I love the early, that it's something new that hasn't been, you're not just going to hear the same whatever. Like everybody's trying to figure out what's going on here. Everybody's trying to figure out, how to approach it. And then, for us at 1 week season where we're so deep into game theory, it's like perfect for us because we can see how like the field is adjusting and different things that are happening. And we're adjusting to that, kind of trying to stay 1 or 2 steps ahead. I think that Jamal Williams, he fits perfectly as a guy who should be going higher in the weekly winners format as opposed to lower. And really that goes for, like you said, any player who has that high contingent value where they're, relying on something to happen, because that's the one thing about those contingent value players in whether it's DraftKings or underdog tournaments. When you take them and you do that, you're banking on the contingent value, but you're also hoping that contingent value hits at a specific time of the year, right? But like a contingent value player in weekly winners, like it doesn't matter when they hit. Like if they have a 3-week stretch in weeks 8, 9, 10 where they're just like gangbusters, and then the other guy comes back and they go back to being pedestrian, like you can still win all the money in weeks 8, 9, 10. So I think it's definitely, it just adds a lot of deep thinking, which is a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. I was trying to pull up another example, but a backfield like Philadelphia or a backfield like Miami, or a backfield like Washington, where we kind of know that they are highly unlikely to devolve out of a timeshare into like a lead back and then plus behind them. Those backfields are very, very interesting because we're highly unlikely to ever see think of it in DFS player pricing. We're highly unlikely to ever see like the specific running backs in those backfields crack something like 6,500, which is like where the pricing threshold for running backs is of like they are a 65 to 75% snap rate type back. But in contests like regular best ball, where they're playoff contests, and contests like weekly winners, where it favors 1 week upside, those backfields are highly valuable for the offense in the situation, the offenses that play on in the situation that they're kind of in. How are you handling, first, kind of two-part question, how are you handling those backfields in a best ball format and then also in weekly winners? And while you talk, I'm going to bring up the respective ADPs.
Sorry, was it you said
Philly, Washington, and Miami.
Philly, Washington, and Miami? Yeah, I think, Philly is one that I've been really I've got 4 running backs from Philly that I've been drafting at various points. Swift, Penny, Gainwell, and Boston Scott. It's we really don't know, but what I do know is the Eagles are going to score a lot of points. And so from that perspective, it just becomes, when I'm at a point where my roster could use a running back, or like I really like pairing Swift or Gainwell with Hurts as like you've got the really, and I have some Penny with Hurts as well. I think the pass catching backs make sense because they can correlate, and I think Penny with Hurts, especially as late as he's being drafted, makes a lot of sense when you think about the game theory of the playoff contests, where if Hurts carries everyone in week 16 to week 17, there's probably not a huge Penny advance rate, and he could be low owned, or vice versa. If Penny has a 3 touchdown game, then Hurts wouldn't be the premium quarterback that advances a lot. So, the Eagles, I think that's just one that, again, it's the uncertainty keeps them all priced down. What are they even called now? The Commanders.
Yeah, right. It's going to change again.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Their receivers, I like their receivers, but it's hard. I'm trying to figure out how that offense ends up even looking on the field this year. Like how they, like somebody's going to be left in the dust. It feels like it has to, especially it doesn't like it, they don't seem like an up tempo offense. Maybe Bieniemy changes that a bit, but that they'll be really interesting. It'll be interesting to see if Rivera lets Bieniemy have autonomy on that.
Yeah,
because his teams have never really played with that kind of tempo. It doesn't seem, and then the last one, the Dolphins, are interesting. I've been taking a ton of Wilson and Mostert, especially. Not so much of a chain or a Chane, however you say it.
A chain, yeah.
I don't really have any of him, but Mostert and Wilson, just because I feel like once Dalvin Cook signs somewhere else, those two, their ADPs are going to jump up like 2 to 3 rounds each at least. Once it becomes clear that they're kind of, I would expect them to, I guess, both of them have struggled to stay healthy. So I think both of them are going to be nicked up at points throughout the year. But when one's nicked up, the other one's going to be like a 70 to 75% workload type guy with a chain, filling in his specific role. So those guys I think are really, really interesting. And they had some really good weeks when the passing game took off too. It was one of those, the Miami offense, when Tua was healthy, was just averaging like 30 points a game.
Yeah, so I think I brought up the Miami backfield here just to look at player pricing. We'll kind of play that same game of like comparing player pricing to regular best ball to weekly winners. And like I alluded to earlier, like the Miami backfield, we're highly unlikely to see any one of these 3 top backs in Mostert, Wilson, and A-Chain be ever priced at like 6,500 because we know it's kind of this like next guy up type mentality or expectation there. But when you talk about, so like when you look at that situation from a best ball player valuation perspective, again, utilizing this idea of like best case scenario player valuation, what is the best case scenario for Mostert or Wilson? And is that the same as compared to a guy like A-Chain? Probably not. Like the best case scenario for Mostert and Wilson is that one or the other gets hurt at some point. And then you see now we have a single player responsible for 65% of the early down work or plus plus. Whereas, they're normally going to be sharing that load. We can expect, based on the draft capital for A-Chain, his profile, his archetype, we can expect him to be this change of pace and pass down type guy. So a role similar to like what, I don't know. We'll just leave it at that. So if that's the case, like, is that ever likely to grow if Mostert or Wilson gets injured? Probably not as much as I think the field thinks it would when you look at his best ball ADP compared to the other guys. A-Chain is going in the 13th round, Mostert in the 15th, and then Wilson in the 16th.
Yeah.
So,
well, and it's even more severe on DraftKings and drafters.
Yeah.
But I mean, A-Chain, he's like, his archetype is like, his best case is like Darren Sproles, right? Like that's the type of player like they would envision him being. But the thing about even that comparison is like, I don't see how that comes to fruition, at least early on in his career, on a team that has Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle on it. Like if you're manufacturing touches in the short areas, like I'm going to use him. I still remember that from that Dolphins-Ravens game that went bananas last year. Like,
yeah. It's like Mike Gesicki, who,
yeah,
like, yeah, he's an athletic freak,
coming out of the backfield, and they
yeah,
doing all sorts of like creative stuff, and it just, I just, it's hard for me to see his role really growing beyond like 3 to 5 touches a game when both of those guys are healthy. Just because if you're going to create touches for a guy in space, I would choose Tyreek or Waddle.
Yeah. So now, like, compare that thought process with like normal BB or best ball or like BBM contest ADP, and then to weekly winners ADP. And this is a situation that I think the field has actually gotten right in that comparison, because both Mostert and Jeff Wilson are being drafted a full round ahead of where they were going in normal best ball in weekly winners. So opposite of kind of that last comparison that we did. And this is basically, I'm doing this to highlight the fact that there are still inefficiencies in the market that we can be looking to attack. And we don't have to be taking this ones and zeros binary stance on player takes. We're like, no, I mean, that backfield probably has value. Let me see where the best place for me to get my exposure to this situation is, and I'll hammer it there. So for me, this backfield is probably better suited to a contest like BBM, where now we're playing to this potential for single game upside best case scenario over a single week when it matters most in like week 15, 16, 17 range. Thoughts on that before we move on?
No, I love it. And I would even add with those specific Wilson and Mostert that I know it's something that's kind of debated across the industry, but I think having those two on the same roster might even be optimal.
Yes.
Like just as because of where they're being drafted, kind of being able to create this Frankenstein like 5th round running back.
Yes.
100%. I think that is like a very efficient use of the picks in those rounds, and definitely kind of plays to the skill sets of those players and the role in the offense that they would have.
I mentioned those, or I used those specific 3 backfields as an example, because those are basically the 3 backfields that I have taken that stance on in normal best ball and weekly winners in the pairing. So like in Philadelphia, I'll pair DeAndre Swift and Rashad Penny, or one of, Kenneth Gainwell or Boston Scott even late. I'll pair Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson, and I'll pair Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson because of that fact. Like, and because it's not like a lead back and a backup situation, it's we can expect both or all three or four of those bodies in those respective backfields to be contributing on a weekly basis. So now where is their likeliest value coming from? It's coming from efficiency and touchdowns. And they're on offenses where that could be the case at a high frequency this season. So that's kind of why I set that up, coming full circle, closing shots on this little backfield discussion.
No, I love that. A couple others that I talked about, the Lions, I think Gibbs and Montgomery.
Yeah.
They're a little more expensive, but
And that's why I would agree.
That
Their
offense produces backfield opportunities.
Yeah.
And especially with Goff as their quarterback, I don't see that changing. But yeah, I think that approach is very viable. And again, looking at it from a best ball theory perspective, even like Seattle with Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, one of those guys, when you have backfields like that, one of these guys could kind of take the lead and kind of carry you throughout the season. And then all of a sudden they go down and the other guy's like a superstar for 3 weeks. I think that, that handcuffing or, multiple backs from different backfields is very much more viable than I think the industry over the last 2 or 3 years has led us to believe.
Is that something that you're utilizing? So more of the specific example that you gave with Seattle with whatever their names are. I'm not
Walker and Charbonnet. Yeah.
Walker and Charbonnet, thank you. With that specific example, is that something that you're utilizing at a higher rate on a site like DraftKings or Drafters, compared to the shallower rosters on Underdog? The lead and the backup type backfield.
Yeah. I mean, those are kind of, that is kind of the tip of the iceberg on most of my stuff. Like you said, focuses on DraftKings and Drafters, and making the best use of those 2 extra roster spots is like kind of at the core of my philosophy and how I do a lot of things. And I think that, I think specifically on those, it's might be a little thinner needle to thread on Underdog, but it's also, it's a thing where there's an equilibrium there where it's a little bit tougher to do, but having the less roster spots, which makes it tougher to do, makes it something that the field is doing less. So there's some value there too. So it's a thin needle to thread, but that's basically what best ball tournaments are, is trying to thread some thin needles.
Yeah. So we're going to continue the looking at DraftKings player pricing, and we're going to skip over the top tier of wide receivers because it's very similar in player pricing to best ball ADP. And we're going to take a look at this kind of middle range and down. Same thing here. Anybody that initially jumps off the page to you?
Drake London stands out to me. He's a rookie, or he was a rookie last year. But and I know that the target competition around him was not great. But his ability to earn targets at a high level, and he produced pretty well with, kind of shaky quarterback play. Kyle Pitts still looks like he's kind of hobbling around a bit at camp. And that, I think that Atlanta offense, I mean, it should be pretty good this year. With Bijan being 8,000 and Drake London being 5,400, I think that, I think it's interesting. London's going to be the clear wide receiver 1, very talented young player. He kind of stands out to me there. Obviously, Deebo Samuel right ahead of him. But frankly, I mean, where he's priced at here kind of explains why I haven't been drafting much of him, to be honest. The guy that kind of stood out to me that we scrolled past was that Tyler Lockett is priced right between T. Higgins and Jerry Jeudy, which is pretty interesting and kind of funny considering
it's
it
awesome.
seems like it's been like 2 straight years that he just continues to be discounted. I get with JSN in town now, it's like a thing, but it's just interesting.
Yeah, look at a guy like Chris Olave, who is a border like a 1-2 turn pick in best ball. And
Yeah.
Tyler Lockett opens the season with a price higher than him.
Yeah.
On DraftKings. Yeah, that's eye-opening for sure.
And the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. He's probably overpriced here and underpriced in best ball.
Yeah. This is one that I have highlighted a couple times. This pricing discrepancy here. And I have highlighted a couple times over the previous week or so, and even went into like the breaking down the Vegas implied odds of reaching 1,000 yards. And Mike Evans his current receiving prop is set at 950 yards. Chris Godwin a tick over 900 yards. And yet we see a full round disparity with Chris Godwin being drafted over Mike Evans in half PPR on Underdog. And yet we see the player pricing kind of backs up what Vegas is seeing, that Mike Evans is the better bet to see both touchdowns and yardage rack up this season. So that was a strong take of mine, kind of backed up by backing up my priors here with the initial player pricing. What do you make of this situation here in Tampa Bay?
Yeah, again, I think it makes sense relative to their, and I mean, part of that might also be that Evans had a 51-point game on DraftKings, 2 games ago in their game logs. But I think it makes sense. Like the biggest thing is like for DFS and for DFS, you're looking for those ceilings. And that's why Evans is kind of priced for his, theoretical weekly upside. And so I think that for best ball tournaments, that's probably not being valued enough for him to be being taken that far behind Godwin.
Bingo, bango, bongo. Give me the Bucks, dude. That is exactly what we're fishing for. I think with that
really,
setup.
My kind of next level like thought on that is that if you're taking one of these guys in the range, either one of these guys in the range they're drafting them, if you have the opportunity, you should absolutely be drafting the other one too. Because if one of them pans out at their draft cost, that means that basically the Bucks offense was functional. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like there's not going to be a middle ground. Either the Bucks are going to be really, really bad and these guys are going to, like, neither of them are going to pay off, or like Mayfield's going to be able to get it to them and they're going to make us look silly because they're going to have like 30%, 30 and 25% target shares. And if the offense is halfway decent, 5th, 6th round guys with that type of talent and workload is going to be kind of look silly to have passed on.
So what's your player takey kind of stance on that offense? Because Vegas is telling us that they expect the quarterback in Tampa to be somewhat functional, and ADP is kind of telling us the other side relative to the talent level of these two players. How are you handling that situation?
I mean, I think Baker Mayfield is a lot better than what the last 18 months narrative has been. I mean, he played at the end of his Browns tenure. He was playing through injuries. He had been really good for like a year and a half before that. Their playoff season, he was really, really good. He was really good his rookie season as well. He had like a slump in between there. But then he went to Carolina, and that was like such a messy situation last year. Like Rule didn't know what he was doing, and then they like traded McCaffrey, and like they're just like it wasn't going to work there. He's always kind of been a guy who has he's not a talent elevator, but he can get the ball to his talent when he has it. And I think this is kind of like a perfect fit. Like he's not going to be afraid to, throw the ball up to Mike Evans, and let him win contested catches. He's not going to, he's going to target Godwin a ton in the middle of the field. K. Dotton had some good games last year. Rashad White, he can catch the ball out of the backfield. So, I mean, I think it's perfect for him as like a point guard, kind of just distributing the ball.
Yeah.
He doesn't have to be like the guy making plays. So I think from that perspective, I mean, I'm pretty high on them. I think relative to what the field thinks. So if that makes sense.
Yeah. Samesies, I think. We're going to move over. We got about 15 minutes left. We're going to try and keep this to an hour. But we're going to move over to tight ends and kind of same discussion. Where are the disparities in best ball versus initial player pricing here? And obviously, Travis Kelce is not on the slate, but he would be at the top.
Yeah, well, your boy Tyler Higbee being priced above Evan Ingram, that stands out pretty quickly.
Yeah, buddy.
Also, Dalton Schultz, I'm pretty high on this season. But again, it kind of, as far as best ball, like you could see where, like I think it's interesting. Like you can scroll down further, and there's a lot of tight ends. Just like in best ball drafts, really, if you're not getting the early ones, you can get kind of the same type of player and expectation for really cheap as some of these like mid-price guys.
Yeah. I think you nailed the first one. Tyler Higbee jumped out like a sore thumb to me. Between Dallas Goedert and Evan Ingram. Another one that jumped out to me is Kyle Pitts and how low he is here. With the perennial, well, not perennial, but at least over the last 2 seasons, the hype that we've gotten preseason on Kyle Pitts, and now he has added the injury. I mean, Kyle Pitts is priced basically the same price as Cole Kmet and Gerald Everett on opening DK pricing, and they are not being drafted in the same range. So, that jumped out to me. This one is interesting down here because this range, we basically have David Njoku and Pat Freiermuth, who are relatively in their own tier as far as ADP goes in best ball. They're kind of in this nebulous range, this ninth plus 10th round-ish range in ADP. Yet they're priced right around guys that are going much, much later than them in best ball, namely Gerald Everett, Cole Kmet. We talked about Greg Dulcich is probably the next, the end of that kind of Dave Njoku, Freiermuth tier. But then you see like they're priced around just this clumping, a bunch of tight ends here that are going much, much later. What do you make of that kind of tier of its own, so to speak, with David Njoku, Pat Freiermuth, and the fact that we have like Cole Kmet, Gerald Everett types being priced above them?
Yeah, I mean, I think like to me, that's it explains to you why I have like no David Njoku or Pat Freiermuth in best ball.
Yeah. Same.
Because basically like
Well,
they
Njoku,
are drafted where they're drafted, not necessarily because it's a human psychology thing, which like you'll enjoy this. I know with listening to recent things. But like they're drafted where they're drafted because they project the next best after that like group of top guys. And so when people are drafting and like people look at their lineup and they say,
like, I need a tight end.
Yeah, I need a tight end. It's round 9 and I don't have a tight end. Who do I take? Oh, shoot, who's the best ones available? And those are the next guys on the list. So then guys, somebody takes it. And then, ADP, like you've talked about, is like it's a product, a function of, all these drafts and it being put together. So it's like, a wisdom of the crowd, but also like a foolishness of the crowd situation sometimes where like those guys aren't necessarily, this pricing is more accurate. You can fiddle a couple $100 any way you want with these guys, but like, Tyler Higbee, I would say probably Tyler Higbee through, is there that much of a difference between him and like, or I know you like Higbee, so I'll leave him out. But I mean, even if you just start at Cole Kmet, 4,400. So everybody
Yeah.
below 4,400. Cole Kmet and a Hunter Henry at 3,500, or uh, Logan Thomas at 3,200, or Hayden Hurst at 3,000. Like
Mhm.
for 1 week, is there much difference? Like they're all going to see like 4 to 7 targets. Like
Yeah, their median projection is going to be very, very similar.
yeah, so it's just that's why yeah, I'd have a lot of late round tight end guys and not many in that middle range.
Yeah, I started this draft cycle by targeting David Njoku because I was targeting the Cleveland Browns. And then I kind of had that same, not realization, but just through observations of, hey, these guys are being drafted where they're being drafted because this is the very natural, like, oh shit range for tight end. Not because they are, their median projections are much better, not because of this or that. It's just this is the panic where the panic sets in at the tight end position. So I really like that you shouted that out. We both kind of came to that same conclusion on our own independently. Um, and I think that is one of the cool things that comes from these kind of like shoot the shit type sessions where I did the same thing with John Warner. We were like, we were going to cover weekly winners for the first time together. And we were like, we're not going to talk about it prior to, because I think a lot of good comes from it. And that's why I kind of wanted to, when we were throwing this together, I was like, all right, dude, I know like we would rather have a show sheet here, but we're going to go in blind. We're going to do no show sheet. We're just going to see where this takes us and we're going to see what comes of it. And I think that's important. And I think a lot of good stuff did come from this. So before we get out of here, any other like parting shots as far as like the comparison between initial pricing release, how it relates to best ball, how it relates to weekly winners, or anything like that?
Well, I have to, and since we still have the tight end page, oh, you took it down.
Oh,
We have
here
the
we go.
tight end
Here we go.
page up.
There we
Uh,
go.
I would not. I would be remiss if I did not use this opportunity with the tight end page up. If you just scroll one player down, my boy Isaiah Likely right there.
Yeah.
And I've talked big about him, and I believe he's like my highest owned player in best ball for sure on DraftKings. He's like 48% or something. But like again, just thinking about it from the lens of in the playoffs, you are looking for that 1 week weekly upside, and if you were able to, if your team advanced and then you were able to just pick a DFS lineup, let's say the first 14 weeks you had a best ball team, but then you got
Ooh,
put in week 15 and you had to make a DFS lineup.
I like where this is going.
If Mark Andrews was not playing, what would Isaiah Likely be priced at? So
Probably 45, 4,800,
yeah, and if Andrews had been out for a couple weeks prior to that and
maybe
Likely had
more.
played that role, probably in like the mid to upper fives. So
Yeah.
when like I like to think about it when I'm thinking about the contingent value discussion we had earlier.
Yep.
Um, I like to think about it from the standpoint of like a thought process I take is if things break right for this player, especially players that I'm taking late in drafts, how much would they be priced at in DFS if like this best case scenario played out for him?
Yeah.
And so like, I mean, if you like trying to win a DFS tournament, well, if you could break one rule, what would it be? Well, you'd spend over the salary cap.
Yeah.
So like, how can I build a lineup through best ball that in DFS I would have like an illegal salary cap by like an astronomical margin? Kind of that thought process.
That's
That's
super sharp.
yeah. So that's kind of my, I guess, parting shot.
I love that, man. That was awesome. Thanks for coming on late notice. Mike actually had to leave his family, drive to the office for this episode. So that is dedication. Thank you again for joining us, dude, on short notice. I think this was super cool, super valuable. And it's just a snapshot of what you can expect to get from the 1 week season Best Ball Plus product this season. Mike and I, we designed this kind of product together. We wanted to model it to really affect the maximum impact that we could in the shortest amount of time. And the way that we decided to structure it is via these training sessions, which you can think of as 30 to 60-minute one-on-one training sessions to get better at best ball. With that, we have rankings, we have this stuff in practice, we have all kinds of stuff in this package, we have tools. So head on over to oneweekseason.com, get signed up for Best Ball Plus. We will see you in those draft lobbies.